Begay,
Lila Montoya,
Nicole Westbrook,
Kathleen Ortiz,
Cornelia Jemez,
Ashlyn Mike.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the American Indian Resource Center's 4th annual observance of the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, or MMIWG. We are glad to be joined by all of you today. My name is Alex. I use she, her pronouns. I'm Womxn, and I'm an intern for the AIRC.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Lopez, and I'm a second-year intern here at the American Indian Resource Center. I use she, they pronouns, and my tribal affiliation is Lakota.
Hello, my name is Jemez Ortiz, and I am the program coordinator for the American Indian Resource Center. I use she, her, and ella pronouns, and I am a Northern Cheyenne tribal member.
Before we begin today's event, we'd like to acknowledge that UC Santa Cruz is located on the unceded territory of the Waswa-speaking Yupi tribe. The Amamatan tribal band, comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to Mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma.
The American Indian Resource Center, or AIRC, founded in the year 2000, is one of 6 resource centers at UC Santa Cruz. Our mission is to support the needs of Native American students and increase Native visibility on campus. The AIRC is also home to the People of Color Sustainability Collective. Throughout the year, we host workshops and presentations that raise awareness about issues that pertain to Indigenous peoples.
We would like to acknowledge our campus partners who have helped make this event possible. The UCSC Campus Advocacy Resources and Education Office, or CARE, El Centro, and the Women Resource Centers, and the Mary Porter Sesnon Gallery. Now we will hear from the CARE advocates about what services they offer.
Hi everyone, my name is Siobhan Maher, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a prevention education intern at CARE. Because the content shared during these programs contains discussion and aspects of sexual and interpersonal violence, we want to remind you all that CARE is here for you. I will briefly introduce services and resources we offer, along with how to get in touch with us. CARE is the confidential resource on campus for prevention education, resources, and support services for sexual violence, dating and domestic violence, and stalking. We provide support services both for people who have been directly impacted by these issues and people who might identify as support persons or concerned community members. Our free advocacy is available to all campus affiliates, including students, staff, and faculty. All of CARE services are confidential and privileged. This means that we don't share any information with Title IX, law enforcement, or other campus offices without a survivor's consent. The CARE advocates are able to provide support in many different ways. They support survivors in their decision-making and understand the complexities that can arise from these issues. Our advocates are state-certified crisis counselors trained in using trauma-informed practices. Also, all of our services are survivor-centered, which means our advocates prioritize the rights, needs, and wishes of the survivor. CARE advocates provide holistic support services and help the survivor understand their rights and options. Advocates frequently provide ongoing emotional support and safety planning. Sexual violence can take away a survivor's autonomy, and our advocates aim to help restore survivors' sense of power and safety and foster their long-term healing. Advocates can also help with academic accommodations and direct referrals to other campus resources like CAPS, slug support, and more to meet survivors' needs. Finally, advocates support survivors' decisions whether to report to the police, to Title IX, or not to report at all. If the survivor does choose to report to either Title IX or the police, CARE advocates can be with survivors every step of the way through that process. This is just a basic overview of our advocacy services. If you have any questions with regards to what CARE offers, please feel free to reach out to us. CARE is open Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Our staff is working both remotely and in person and can be reached either by phone at 831-502-2273 or email at care@ucsc.edu. You are also welcome to come by our office located at Oaks College, room 221. As you are participating and engaging with the events in honor of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, know that CARE is here. Throughout this series of programs, one of our CARE advocates will be available by phone or text at the number that will be put in the chat. So if you start to feel overwhelmed at any moment and would like extra support, please feel free to reach out to them. Thank you, AIRC staff and interns, for all your work and energy in creating this program and for allowing me to share a little bit about CARE. I hope you all practice some form of self-care today. Thank you again.
For today's event, we have pre-recorded a presentation from our inaugural keynote speaker, Christina M Castro, also known as Dr. X. Christina M Castro is Jemez, Taos Pueblo, and Chicana. She resides in Santa Fe, New Mexico, within her traditional homelands. She is a mother, writer, scholar, organizer, and co-founder of Three Sister Collective, a Pueblo's women group devoted to activism, empowerment, and rematriation of Indigenous lands and communities. She received her doctorate in May of 2018 from Arizona State University's School of Social Transformation and Justice Studies.
Before we show Dr. X's presentation, we wanted to give a brief introduction of MMIWG to the people who are with us today who may not have knowledge about this issue. We will briefly explain why we honor MMIWG on May 5, introduce some daunting statistics, discuss recent legislation you should be aware of, and lastly, we will highlight some local and national organizations to pay attention to. This is a very complex issue that many people in Indian country are working hard to address, whether that be through grassroots organizations, policy making, filmmaking, the list goes on. We encourage you not to only hear our presentation today, but begin or continue to read, listen, or hear from the many others who have made this their life's work, like Dr. X.
We'll start with some acronyms you may hear throughout the presentation today or have heard before. MMIW stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. MMIWG stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The AIRC prefers to use this acronym. MMIWG2S stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit People. We'll go into depth about Two-Spirit People in a later presentation. MMIWG-TS2 stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Two-Spirit People, and Trans People. This acronym recognizes that violence is committed against our trans relatives at a high rate. It also offers a distinction between trans and Two-Spirit people, as these two identities are not the same. MMIP stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous People. This acronym recognizes that Native men experienced high rates of murder by police and face higher rates of violent victimization than any other race. MMIR stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives. This is used to demonstrate that Native people are all related and that we are all being affected by this.
I'll give a brief explanation of the importance of the day and how it came to be the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. In 2018, the U.S. Senate unanimously passed a resolution to make May 5th the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The resolution was introduced by Senator Stephen Daines, who represented the states of Montana. The resolution seeks to honor the memory of Hannah Harris, a Northern Cheyenne woman from Lame Deer, Montana, who was found on the powwow grounds of the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in 2013. May 5th was designated at the date of this remembrance because it is Hannah Harris's birthday. Today, she should have turned 30 years old.
We are now going to share some statistics. Though these numbers are daunting, we share them with you in hopes you'll understand the magnitude of this problem and the devastating impact it is having on our communities. These statistics only further what we've always known, that the health and safety of Native women and girls are not prioritized and frankly ignored. More than 4 in 5 Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. Native women face murder rates 10 times the national average. Murder is the third leading cause of death for Native girls ages 10 to 24, and the sixth leading cause of death for Native women ages 25 to 34. Please note that murder is not even in the top 10 leading causes of death for white women. Their leading causes of death include health-related issues like cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. Natives only make up 2% of the population in the United States, but represent 5% of its missing person cases. In 2016, 5,712 cases of MMIWG were reported, but only 116 of them were logged into the Department of Justice's Missing Persons database. 75% of crimes investigated in Indian country involve homicide, rape, violent assaults, and child abuse. 95% of MMIWG cases are never covered by national or international media. 97% of Native women who are victims of sexual assault experience this violence at the hands of non-Native perpetrators.
There have been recent calls for action and structural reform at the federal level that we would like to mention here. There are many more federal and statewide laws that we encourage everyone to look into as well. The Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, creates and supports comprehensive, cost-effective responses to domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. Since its enactment in 1994, VAWA programs administered by the U.S. Department of Justice and Health and Human Services have dramatically improved federal, tribal, state, and local responses to these crimes. The VAWA Reauthorization Act of 2022 was included in the fiscal year 2022 omnibus spending package signed by President Joseph R. Biden on March 15, 2022. This bipartisan VAWA reauthorization includes groundbreaking provisions to strengthen and modernize the law. The law provides survivors the thousands of local programs that serve them and communities with much needed resources for housing, legal assistance, alternatives to criminal responses, and prevention programming. It also includes new economic justice provisions and bolsters access for survivors of all genders by strengthening non-discrimination laws and create an LGBTQ services program. The law also restores tribal jurisdiction, allowing tribes to hold non-native perpetrators accountable, improves existing housing protections, and increases access to emergency and short-term housing, and creates dedicated investments in culturally specific service providers to ensure survivors of color are supported. The Not Invisible Act of 2019 requires an increase of intergovernmental coordination to identify and combat violent crime on Indian lands and of Indians. More details about this act can be read at www.congress.gov. We also sent the link in the chat. In November 2019, the U.S. President signed Executive Order 13898, now known as Operation Lady Justice. This order established a task force on missing and murdered American Indians and Alaska Natives. According to the website, the task force aims to enhance the operation of the criminal justice system and address the concerns of American Indian and Alaska Native communities regarding missing and murdered people, particularly missing and murdered women and girls. You can read more about Operation Lady Justice on the website. And the link has been posted in the chat. As part of Operation Lady Justice, Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, of the Laguna Pueblo, has recently established a missing and murdered unit within the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The unit focuses on analyzing and solving missing and murdered cases involving American Indians and Alaska Natives. It will work to leverage tribal, federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies and other stakeholders as necessary to investigate and solve cases. For more information about the Missing and Murdered Unit, you can visit the Bureau of Indian Affairs website.
The AIRC team created a resource guide last year that includes recommended readings, books, movies, organizations, and information sharing opportunities for those who wish to take a deeper dive into this human rights issue. MMIWG is a complex and involved movement that requires an understanding of settler colonialism and Indigenous knowledge. We have provided free readings in this guide in the hopes of encouraging allyship, education, and awareness. We also encourage you to visit and share our website and find the MMIWG tab under Resources for more recommendations and information. You can use the link posted in the chat to access this guide.
We'll now share about some organizations. A local resource we wanted to include is the Walnut Avenue Family and Women's Center. It is a nonprofit family agency located in Santa Cruz, California, offering a variety of programs for individuals and families for happier, healthier relationships with self, with loved ones, and with community. They provide services for people of all genders, sexualities, family and relationship models, race and ethnicity, ages, abilities, economic status, and other identities and lived experiences. All domestic violence services are voluntary and free of charge for people of all genders, sexual orientations, and family and relationship models. Next, based in Lame Deer, Montana, the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, Incorporated, otherwise known as NIWRC, is a Native-led nonprofit organization dedicated to ending violence against Native women and children. The NIWRC provides national leadership in ending gender-based violence in tribal communities by lifting up the collective voices of grassroots advocates and offering culturally grounded resources, technical assistance and training, and policy development to strengthen tribal sovereignty. The Native Women's Collective, based in Northern California, is a grassroots nonprofit organization that supports the continued growth of Native American arts, culture, leadership, and community development through public education, workshops, exhibits, research, cultural preservation projects, programs, and technical assistance. The collective works to advance emerging and established artists and creative professionals by providing a network and forum for capacity building that centers social and environmental justice. Rising Hearts, located in Los Angeles, is an Indigenous-led grassroots organization committed to the hard work in elevating Indigenous voices and promoting and supporting intersectional collaborative efforts across all movements with the goals of racial, social, climate, and economic justice. Their primary focuses are to inform, elevate, mobilize, and organize through strategic and targeted advocacy, establishing collaborative partnerships to help create a better and safer future and environment for all relatives who inhabit this planet, past, present, and future.
The Sovereign Bodies Unit, or SBI, located in Humboldt County in California, builds on Indigenous traditions of data gathering and knowledge transfer to create, disseminate, and put into action research on gender and sexual violence against Indigenous people. They empower Indigenous communities and nations to continue their work to end gender and sexual violence against Indigenous people through data-driven partnerships that enhance research efforts, develop best practices, and transform data to action to protect and heal their peoples. The Urban Indian Health Institute, or UIHI, located in Seattle, Washington, is leading the way in research and data for urban American Indian and Alaska Native communities. As a public health authority and one of the 12 tribal epidemiology centers in the country, and one of the only that serves urban Indian health programs nationwide, UIHI conducts research and evaluation, collects and analyzes data, and provides disease surveillance to strengthen the health of American Indian and Alaska Native communities.
Please note that this presentation was pre-recorded and there will not be a Q&A session today. We will now hear from our keynote speaker, Christina M Castro.
When you're born into this world as a woman, you're born into war. Every minute of every day, the darkness tries to slay. Trying to keep you bent up and out of shape. Trying to keep you from loving when they show hate. Trying to make you forget you are sacred. Well, I am stronger. I am stronger than you know. I am stronger. I am stronger than you know. Hey, I'm talking to you. Those ways, they're not good for you. You deserve nothing but respect, do you? Compassion and kindness, oh, they were mean to you, but that don't change a thing about you. Nothing alters your soul. What you think about that? You are stronger. You are stronger than you know. You are stronger. You are stronger than you know. Heal the women, heal the generations of our nations coming. The children, sacred vessels watching every single thing you're doing, what you're doing. When we speak our words, praying you will learn. Soft heart, voice firm. Yeah. What are you fearing? A woman's voice caught up in God's enduring. Which burns, tables turned. What are you yearning? Safety for a world. Stand up and uncurl. You got it, girl. This is your revolution. You are stronger. You are stronger than you know. You are stronger. You are stronger than you know.
Good day. That was a track called Stronger by Jacqueline Cordova. Jacqueline Cordova is a contributor to the Spirit Line CD, Woven for Our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives. That CD was produced by Clara Natanaba Productions and Three Sisters Collective, and debuted in 2019 in August. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Christina M Castro. My community lovingly refers to me as Dr. X. There is a whole story behind my name. I wish I had hours to tell you all the stories that led to the Dr. X, but we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And with that, I would just like to give a brief introduction of myself. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen to bring up my PowerPoint. And bear with me, I got a little emotional already with that song. And thank you all for joining me today. I hope your day is going well. I'm coming to you from Ogapoge, Santa Fe, New Mexico. That is a photo of me painted by the artist Avis Charlie. She's Dene and Dakota. She's doing a series of contemporary Native women and asked to paint me in my element. And so I guess you could say this is one of my elements. Let me go to the next slide. So as you can see, that's me. I'm Dr. X. I am Taos Pueblo on my matriarchal side. I am Jemez Pueblo. I am Chicana. I have other tribal affiliations that I really honor. California Native, Womxn, but I don't really know enough about them to actively claim them, but I am speaking that in hopes that I will one day have more connection to the other parts of my identity. I was born in Southern California, San Fernando Valley to be exact, from a family who participated in the federal Indian relocation program. I currently reside, like I said, in Ogapoge, Santa Fe. That's the state capital. Within my traditional homelands, I'm a mother, farmer, scholar, writer, educator, community organizer, multidimensional artist, etc. In 2017, I co-founded Three Sisters Collective. We are an Indigenous woman-centered grassroots organization devoted to art, activism, education, community building. I received my doctorate from the Pueblo PhD program through the School of Social Transformation and Justice Studies at Arizona State University. It was a unique program. I graduated in 2018. I pretty much manage our organization, and I'm an independent consultant with Castro Consulting LLC, which I started in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. So as you see me here, you'll see me in my with my doctoral gown as well as my traditional attire. But that wasn't always me. So I just wanted to take you quickly because I think it's important that we honor our ancestors, we honor our lineage in the work that we do. And so I'm gonna just show you, this is like the person I used to be. I grew up in Southern California during the gang culture, and it's pretty amazing. And I really want to tell college students that and show them the trajectory of myself, because it's important for you to see we weren't always academics, right? We were people and we were living in our experiences. I grew up in LA during, gangster rap was born. This was the culture I was a part of. Most of these, probably all of these guys are probably not even alive anymore. My boyfriend at the time died tragically because of senseless violence. And so I really, when I look at the work I do and why I'm so passionate about MMIR and MMIW is because there's so many times when I could have been a statistic. And so also just knowing that it doesn't matter what your background is, you can always evolve, and we're always evolving. And these are my grandparents who always managed to set me straight, no matter how much I was out in the streets. I had these two beautiful people on the left raising me. My grandpa from Jemez Pueblo, my grandma from Taos Pueblo, part of the federal Indian relocation program, and really raised me because my mom was really young when she had me. And another photo of one of my main supporters, my dad, at one of our feast days at Jemez Pueblo. My daughter is 9 years old. Being a mother and a matriarch is something I take very seriously, and work really hard to do the healing work that comes with the work that we're doing in restorative and social justice, because most of the work that we need to do is really the internal work to really change the community. So I think that's some of the basis for my work is my rootedness in my culture as a Tiwa woman, as a Toa woman, as a Chicana, as a mother, as a matriarch, as a descendant of very resilient people. So
I always, start my presentations really looking at systems that continue to negatively impact us as Indigenous communities. I don't stay there because I'm really about creating the Indigenous futurisms that I want to see moving forward for us as a people and as Indigenous people in the Americas, because we always have to keep in mind the movement and is not just here in the United States. It's a land-based movement that starts up in Canada, all the way down into Mexico, to South America, to the Middle Americas, and always just really looking at the larger picture, and really breaking these nation border boundaries that we are always institutionalized to only think about our country. So if we look at these systems, I just like to have these slides because I like visual images to things that I'm thinking about constantly. And, it's very one-dimensional, but you always have to look at these things as very buoyant, as very active. And the next slide will show you that in a different way. So looking at all the systems of colonization that are always at work every day of our lives. So whether it's the supremacies on the left that work in tandem with extractive capitalism. So, we're looking at white supremacy, all the manifest destinies, all the things that have led to the exploitation all around the world of people of color, whether it's through enslavement, active genocide, racism. America's, racism permeates our nations and our ideologies. And that ties into things like extractive labor, expendable peoples, who's expendable and who isn't, ties into the continued erasure of Native people through cultural appropriation in all the ways that we know, from names of cars to sports mascots to racist monuments to all these things. And then we put that in tandem with male supremacy, toxic patriarchy, toxic masculinity. We see obviously these playing out in our own communities. We see the invisible labor of women, the unpaid labor of women, the exploitation of labor in women. An example of that would be like the maquiladoras in Mexico, and the women that are continuing to ongoing go missing. That's like 5 hours south of me here in northern New Mexico. In Juarez and down south, and the machismo culture that's embedded in a lot of Latino cultures, Latino Indigenous cultures, as well as any culture that's been colonized by Spanish. You find a lot of that machismo culture, and then that leads to issues of femicide, MMIW, child abuse trauma, and then the last one, human supremacy, ecocide. That ties in directly with MMIW, with extractive colonialism and resource extraction. And that's really prevalent here in the Southwest, Texas. New Mexico is a really big gas and oil state. I'll talk a little bit about more about that here in a minute. So everything's connected, and I really encourage you to think about things intersectionally. I actually like the term, and I'd like to coin this term. We have the term intersectionality that was coined by an African-American scholar, but I'm interested in looking at, I think Indigenous people, there's another layer to that. And so I call it like multidimensionality, because what fails to be considered, I think, in academia or academic scholarly circles is spirit. And so if you look at us as Indigenous people, I would say it's safe to say we're spiritual people, we're land-based people, we're connected to the land. There's a spiritual dimension in how we move in this world. And that was a direct message I got today too for Indigenous students. I was really praying a lot before this talk. And I got a direct download for y'all. And it was that as Indigenous people, especially if you're in the academy, that you need to be actively engaging in spiritual practice. Because as we look at these buoyant, ever moving cultures of capitalism, Western culture of violence, most of the systems that they've created are extractive in nature. So even in the academic institutions, as you know, I just heard one of the staff members talking about being very tired too. And so there's so much output we're giving. I feel like as Indigenous people, we're always working 3 times as hard as the average person just to be to be accepted in the dominant culture. Then you also, if you have any inclination to reclaim culture, you're consistently working on cultural revitalization and reclamation for yourself and your community. And then how you're going to use your education to give back to your community. And now we also have a third wave of like what, I don't know, it's like a gerbil running through a cage. It's like now we have all this new allies, folks who want to be on the right side of the story, right? I don't use the term history, I use the story, our story, my story. And so now we have the added responsibility of bringing allies into the fold and helping them to properly and respectfully engage with us. So I consider my work never ending when we look at these systems in the culture of violence and how they're always working to extract us, extract intellectual property from us, physical labor from us. And yeah, wow, it gets deep. Is anybody with me? Can I get a thumbs up or an amen or a heart or something, just so I know you're all hearing me, because I have my presentation on and I can't really see anybody, so I'm going to keep moving forward. So as we talk about all these systems and how they work together, I just want to give you a little background, especially here in New Mexico, having the highest rate of MMIR in the nation. You know, look, this is like the site of the beginning of all the things that we're talking about in a way, in terms of recent catastrophic events that have negatively impacted our lifeways and communities. New Mexico is the site of Los Alamos, is where they developed atomic energy, the atomic bomb. And how they developed that is through extractive industries like uranium mining on the Navajo Nation. So they discovered uranium in the early part of the early 1900s. They were like, wow, we can use this to make some really big weapons of mass destruction. We're going to set up a military style base up here in Los Alamos, New Mexico. We're going to bring in the biggest thinkers, and we're going to create some amazing weapons of mass destruction to, enact upon the earth in our effort to globally dominate and expand our US expansion and globalization. So this was the first detonation in 1945 down in White Sands. And as you can see here in the slide, it says, along with the non-consensual relationship with the earth, the nuclear age brought the violent enforcement of the heteronormative nuclear family, decimating our indigenous ways of life. So here in New Mexico, we've had waves of colonialism, starting with Spanish, and then move into American occupation, nation statehood. New Mexico became a state like in 1912. And then you see the beginning of the extractive industries, the railroad, the extraction of indigenous arts and culture that you still see today if you come to Santa Fe. And just really looking at the long-term effects of this on the people and the community. It's all connected, right? So this is a quote from one of the main developers of the atomic bomb. And he says, I have become, now that I've detonated this giant weapon of mass destruction that we're gonna go replicate and use around the world, I have become the death, the destroyer of worlds. And I just found, when I found this quote, I was just like, holy smoke, like this is not only citing from a religious text, the Bhagavad Gita, but he's using this to basically condone and exalt weapons of mass destruction on people and the earth. And the long-term effects of these weapons of mass destruction and the testing they did here in New Mexico is just so violent, and continues to permeate through cancers, miscarriages, where this bomb was initially detonated. I mean, it really just, the ongoing impacts of it are ongoing, as well as the labs where they created these weapons. There was a lot of toxic dumping and things like that. And a lot of tribal communities exist up here in northern New Mexico that continue to have waterways sabotage, land bases sabotage. And so as I wrote here, this is why we need indigenous rematriation, because extractive violent colonialism is a direct non-consensual attack on indigenous land and body sovereignty. So I want you to understand that these ideologies that come with things like manifest destiny and extractive colonialism. So I talked a little bit about the impacts of these testings. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but just to give you some background about where our money comes from, where the economy comes from in this state, as well as other states in the nation. Coal and uranium mining. You look at these red dotted areas, and really where the land has been so toxified, the waterways. As I mentioned, uranium mining started in the 50s, I guess, when a Navajo Dene man discovered uranium while herding sheep. I think my date's wrong on that. I'm not 100% sure. But the point being that this uranium boom was launched in the Southwest, which eventually led to gas and oil fracking that we see today. And initially, the federal government was the sole purchaser of uranium for atomic weapons and experimental nuclear power. So this is just a localized, subjective look at the land-body connection, which is very directly tied into MMIW, and I'll get to more of that later. So there's just an interesting picture I found of the Navajo uranium miners who working underground, breathing in lots of toxic chemicals, taking all these toxic powders back to their family, and leading. And this is like one of the only jobs people could do in that area. This area is still considered pretty remote part of New Mexico, and so blah, blah, blah. I mean, environmental racism is real, and we as Indigenous people continue to suffer the lasting impacts. So I'm not going to belabor this. I just think it's important to see, because now this is when we're moving into looking at recent extractive industries. You see a lot of transient male populations. You see increase in sex trafficking. You see prostitution, all kind of social ills kind of developing around places where extractive industry is happening. And this is not subjective to the Southwest here. I mean, look at tar sands up in Canada. They're always finding women. So there's a direct correlation between what happens to the land happens to the people. As you see the land being extracted and pillaged, you're seeing it represented in the health and life quality of the people. So right now, the fracking and resource extraction here in New Mexico is found in these highlighted areas. We have the Permian Basin in southeastern New Mexico, hundreds of miles of pipelines. This is where you see a lot of, just all the things. And lots of water is being used for this too. So it's important to look at how all our resources are being extracted, whether it's the oil, but the water used to do the fracking to fissure the land. Like they send like the water down into the earth, and it creates like these mini earthquakes. So everything works in tandem, right? So now we're also looking at the encroachment of extractive industry on some of our most sacred places. Here in New Mexico, we have Chaco Canyon, a hub, an intellectual hub, pre-colonial intellectual hub, a place where many tribal people and communities came and mapped stars, and you had great scholarship and great thinkers engaging in probably amazing dialogues by the size of the dwellings in the kivas here. It was a community, but it was also a place of great intellectual, it was like an intellectual repository. So how does this all, connect to missing and murdered Indigenous relatives? I think those of you who are engaged in academic studies, you can probably see some of the correlations here. And I'm going to go ahead and just take a breath, because even just talking about the legacy of extractive industry in New Mexico and the ongoing, I mean, there's actually a action happening here in Santa Fe today at 5 o'clock. It's a group, it's lots of environmental groups coming together to, they're disrupting a talk or an engagement or a convening, I should say, between gas and industry
and politics, basically, because as you know, a lot of these things are working in tandem, politics and industry, right? So there's this fancy schmancy meeting of state leaders and extractive industry leaders happening, and there's a lot of local organizations getting together this afternoon to address that in the form of an action. I don't like to call it protest too much anymore. I like to call them action, because I don't think, because I think protest and a lot of words that are ascribed to the work we do as Indigenous people or grassroots organizations is, words are loaded. I'm always getting Native people to think about words and how we use them. And so when we talk about, a protest, you know, it already has an edge to it. Oh, is there going to be police? Is it safe? You know, and to me, I would like to change that to action or actions or convening or whatever, anything besides a protest, because I don't think Indigenous women or people or community advocating for healthy lands, resources, water, our lives should be considered a protest. I think it should be considered a birthright. Can I get a witness? Thank you. You know, I mean, I think those are new terms and they get loaded. And so the culture of violence always has interesting ways of labeling things. So it's really important to be really critical about the words that we use about ourselves and the work that we do. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a second, just for my own sake. And I'm going to play a song.
For the Indigenous woman. When we were little girls, men stopped in their cars and told us to get in. We ran and ran until we couldn't run anymore. I see you. I am you. At the age of 19, it happened again. Hey, you, yeah, you, I'm talking to you. Following us in their car, we ran and ran until we couldn't run anymore. I see you. I am you. He pushes his way into the window and I scream. I see you. I am you. In a dark college basement, he pressed his body up against mine, and when he pinned me against the wall and scraped into my insides, I thought it was my fault for agreeing to dance with him. I collapsed on the floor and my roommate held me as I cried. I see you. I am you. I wonder how many times I could have ended up as another murdered and missing Indigenous woman. Over and over, I ask myself why we have not done more for you. For the Indigenous woman, the women who watch over us, wipe away our tears, feed us, clothe us, bathe us, teach us. For the women who just are, who no longer get to enjoy the things they once did, to live the lives they had planned for themselves, to love the people they loved. For the women who have not yet become women, who did not get a childhood, who did not dance, who did not graduate. For trans women and two-spirits who are forgotten from the movement yet are the most vulnerable, who have always been a part of our Indigenous societies but are never given the respect they deserve and are misgendered even in their deaths. For the women who are not always perceived as women but something to be conquered, for the women who are none of these things, who are not stereotypes of what an Indigenous woman is supposed to be, whose deaths and disappearances we should still be outraged by anyway, I am sorry. I am sorry we have not done more for you. Scrolling through news feeds, another woman goes missing, murdered, assaulted. Anime was a Mi'kmaq woman, a mother to 2 daughters, and an activist. A fighter, executed by Native men. Tina was Anishinaabe and 15 years old. She was searching for her birth mother, but Tina didn't make it there. She was found in a river, and the man who did it was found not guilty. Savannah was a Spirit Lake Dakota and an Anishinaabe woman, a mother who never met her daughter because she was stolen, taken because she was pregnant. Savannah mutilated and found in a river. Faith was a Halawasaponi woman. I met her once. We received the same scholarship. She was as sweet as honey, a student whose degree was taken from her, found murdered and assaulted in her apartment. Jamie Lee was an Oglala Lakota woman who was two-spirit and trans.
who walked the same streets I once walked. She moved to Sioux Falls for a fresh start, to start her dream. She was stabbed 7 times. How many more whose names I do not know because they are missing, because their names are not reported until they are found in rivers, whose names are never circulated because society does not care. Why have we not done more for you, Indigenous women? Indigenous men, why have you not done more for us? Do you see we will not survive without Indigenous women? What will you do to stand up for your people? Why is there not more outrage for the Indigenous woman? For the Indigenous women whose lives are so much fuller than their deaths, for the Indigenous women who deserve so much more than they are given. You are the earth, you are the strength, you are so much more than your death or disappearance. You are the love of the people. Indigenous woman.
So I just wanted to say, you know, what we're talking about is there's a lot of heavy stuff, and I just hope that you all are taking the time to self-care. If you're having tea, drink water, stay hydrated. And so, yeah, I also wanted just to connect with you all visually so you could see me. I don't know if you got a chance to really see me earlier before I jump back onto my presentation. Ta'a, Tekinopa. Thank you for joining today on this important talk around MMIW, MMIR awareness. So again, I'm going to continue on. Dr. Castro here. I'm going to share my screen. And these tracks are coming from our Spirit Line CD, Woven Together for Our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives CD, which is really cool because it comes with an educational resource and listening guide, because this CD was created to be used as a tool in communities, schools, groups, men's groups, women's groups to discuss the issue, but using art as a means of addressing the issue. One thing our collective really does work a lot on is artivism, art as activism. And so how do you address the issue? You have folks working in policy, you have folks doing direct service with impacted families, you have groups like Three Sisters Collective where we do a lot of arts. And so each track of our CD, which you can find on our website, threesisterscollective.org, under the link MMIW resources. Each song has exercises, both somatic, deep listening, creative, artistic, creative writing. So, and it also shows images of each of the contributors. That's Autumn White Eyes, who recited the poem we just heard, which was for the Indigenous woman. So moving along, back to my presentation here. So let's get back to that. Thank you for your patience. So, you know, here in New Mexico, being the state that has the highest number of missing and murdered relatives, there's so many intersections between environmental racism and our people disappearing. And so just want to acknowledge that this is image you see here is during Indigenous Peoples Day weekend of 2020, where we in our plaza, our community city plaza, we kind of created a space to bring awareness to that during Indigenous Peoples Day. So I want to talk a little bit about our work as a collective with regard to missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And so the way we approach the work too, or me personally, my work ethic is always working from a space of love and healing. Okay, so there's other groups that do frontline direct action. There's all these different orgs and grassroots and, you know, Indigenous folks that approach activism in different ways. And so I think there's space for all of us to do the work. I've been a frontliner. I've spent time at Standing Rock. We've worked pretty hard to do things like take down racist monuments in our city, which, you know, requires some frontlining. But I think the future and the Indigenous futurisms I see is really about how we rebuild our communities and how we rebuild the fabric of our communities after such devastating impacts of colonialism.
And so I'm always looking at, okay, so what do we want? What is the future that we want? What is the future that we desire? So when I look at this picture here, this is one of our first events we ever had, and that was a prayer run in 2019, hosted by our local tribal college, the Institute of American Indian Arts. We did a prayer run. It was a way to convene community, to do something physically engaging. It was also in tandem with different runs going on nationwide. And so we mapped out a little course throughout the campus. So we had college students, we had community, lots of kids, as you can see, and it's a way to have community come together to hold space, but also to do something physical and to do something that really is embodied. I'm really into embodiment right now because the culture of violence sees no worth in in our bodies other than how it could extract labor from us. And if you look at a lot of people, they're not really in their body. And that could be because of trauma. That could be because of the grind where you don't even have a chance to really connect with yourself or your body. And so I teach dance. I teach exercise, dance, fitness. And so I think for me, that's one of the ways that I personally heal is through physical activity and really connecting with my body in that spiritual dimensionality I was telling you about earlier, that we as Indigenous people really need to harness the power of our spirit and on our body. And I think there's a lot to be said about physicality and looking at the way our ancestors were always in moving, and not just moving their minds, which is what a lot of you young folks are doing in college, but also every day are you making time to be physically active, to stand in front of the sun and get that sun power and make your prayer offerings to the earth. Or even the act of running is medicine, movement, dancing is spiritual. So how are you engaging and holding space for yourself and your body every day? Because the grind of academia is hard. I've been there, but also the grind of social justice is hard. The daily grind of being Indigenous every day in this machine is hard, So always holding space for yourself, always taking that time, that intentional time. So this was a really good one of our first events we've had. Back to the album, I think you got a good taste of that. So here's are some of the participants in the album that made this album happen. Voices on the album. We had a really awesome event in 2019, a CD release of this. And all these amazing artists came together to sing, to dance, to move, to honor our Indigenous relatives who are not with us currently. So lots of ways to address the movement is the message. This is at our state capitol, which ironically enough, it's called the Roundhouse because it is modeled in the shape of Pueblo religious structures called kivas. So as a Pueblo person, pre-colonially, we had our places of worship called kivas, and they were typically round. And so interestingly enough, you always think about the way the dominant culture is extracting from the people, whether you look at like here in Santa Fe or even all across the Americas, you see wherever there's churches, chances are there was a sacred site next to that church, or the church was built on top of Indigenous sacred sites. So when I think about the fact that the state capitol is modeled in the shape of one of our sacred kiva structures that you will find in any tribal community here, it's to me evident of how much power our people had, so much so that our state capitol is modeled off of our religious spaces. So yes, it's extractive, but it's also kind of interesting in a weird way. So this is Indigenous Women's Day at the state capitol, February of 2020, which I had a direct hand in organizing this event, first ever during our annual legislative session. We also created these red kind of bandanas to offer community who came to do a prayer walk with us to the state capitol to take our concerns about our community to state legislatures and political leaders.
And so this was one of our events, and this you could say is like directly influencing politics and policy to have us there. This also was an event centered around youth and youth engagement, because when I think about power structures and how we energetically disrupt power structures, most of the time the status quo in our state capital is white men, Hispano men who are making big decisions for the people. And so what would be the counter to that? It would be women, it would be Indigenous women, and furthermore, it would be younger women, Indigenous youth. So to me, that was like the energetic opposite. And so bringing young women and that energy and that spirit, even my daughter here in the front row with the moccasins on and the pink beanie, this is literally spiritual, energetic, rebalancing, recalibrating these spaces. And this is a form of rematriation. So you have to think about the work multidimensionally, folks. How are we recreating systems and disrupting ways that the dominant culture wields power or even perceives power? This is just some of the work we do artistically. These are some zines we've made around the issue of MMIR. I made this little zine here on the bottom right after a case of MMIR that I found compelling. I do spend time researching cases. This young woman, a young person, I don't know if they would self-identify as a woman, Tamika Yellow Horse was found in 2019 in February in Albuquerque in a wash, probably a victim of violence because of perhaps their gender identity. I don't want to make an assumption, but definitely, gender nonconforming, and being an Indigenous person is already it can be tough being an Indigenous woman. We know this, but when you add the layer of trans or LGBTQ, there's always it's always a little more precarious, for lack of a better word. This is my daughter and I on the right. We make a lot of signs. Tonight we actually have a sign making party for May 5th coming up. So where we create a lot of visual imagery around MMIR, which leads to the next slide. The Sisterhood is Sacred mural that we painted last year. And looking at, so interestingly, as I've been organizing for 5-5, I had a conversation around even using the term missing and murdered Indigenous relatives or people, because there's also, really critiquing verbiage and terminology and the power in the breath and the power in the words. And, every time we're saying missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, are we like calling more of it in, is what one Indigenous person was asserting, is by saying it, are we bringing more of it in? It's an interesting point to ponder. But when we created this mural, which is public facing on a, kind of a trafficked street, and we wanted to create a mural around MMIR, a lot of people don't even know that the dominant culture is not even familiar with the acronym MMIW, MMIR, MMIWGTS. And so how would we address it from a different way? Like what is the future that we're creating? What do we want to see more of? Okay. So how do you take the notion of MMIR and move it, flip it into something that is palatable or that can hit the heart space? And so we decided on the phrase "sisterhood is sacred," as well as a refrain that you often hear south of the border in Mexico: "Ni una más, ni una menos," not one more, not one less. And we also put it with the backdrop of the Sani scarf, the scarves, which are actually Russian, Ukrainian, but were traded with the Cree or the northern tribes and brought down to lots of tribes. Now, a lot of Indigenous folks wear these, women and all different folks wear these, and we consider it kind of like native fashion or native aesthetic, but it's become synonymous, the red scarf with the movement as well as fashion, but also it's beautiful. And so you have three women here on the right, kind of an homage to three sisters, but also just really edifying these ideas of what we want to create more of. And we want to hold our women sacred, and we want to build sacred relationships with other women, and really start to heal and grow and revive the matriarchy. And I always talk about the matriarchy as the antidote. Matriarchy is the antidote to Western feminism. Because Western feminism is actually derived from Indigenous women. Those first early suffragists, on the East Coast were really modeling their, I'm gonna stop for a second, let's talk about this. Those early settlers, while their men were over here creating the nation state, the nation of America, these women were, new to the Americas, and they're watching, and they're seeing Indigenous women holding huge spaces of power and being clan leaders and clan mothers. And that's where the idea for feminism even became a thing. So we don't need feminism. Most of our Indigenous cultures had a healthy balance between the masculine and the feminine energies, and knew how to work in tandem. And there was an awesome respect for women as life givers. And obviously a lot of that was disrupted with toxic colonialism and patriarchy. But I would again interrogate the use of feminism as it applies to Indigenous women, because it doesn't take into account our land-based connections, our connections to our Mother Earth, and all those reciprocal relationships that we are responsible to as Indigenous people. So I always say feminism, we don't need feminism, feminism needs us. And so I really use the term rematriation or matriarchy in lieu of feminism. Can I get a witness on that? Thank you very much. Can I get 2 snaps and a clap? Thank you. So moving forward to our next slide, I would just want to share with you some recent cases here in our state that have really impacted me personally and have made me commit to the work even further, as well as really make a commitment to keep pushing for justice as an organization, as Three Sisters Collective. And when I say collective, we are in fact a collective. There's no hierarchy, although I run a lot of the back end of the organization. People move in and out. People come in as needed based on their expertise and the events that we're putting on. So always it's people moving in and out of the collective as they are able. And so, this case here, this is a woman from my tribal community of Jemez Pueblo. In August of last year, August 1st or 2nd, she left the Pueblo, left the res to go to Albuquerque. Shauna Toya is her name. She's mother of 4, just out for groceries, running errands in the evening. And unfortunately never made it home. It was very unlike her to not come home. She was a responsible parent, mother of 4, as mentioned, and her body was found, I believe, the next day in her car. I'm not, I don't know all the background information about the autopsy or anything like that, but what I do know is that there has been nobody accused, there has been nobody charged, and her mother, Geraldine, and I have been in communication, and her mother is really exasperated with the effort to get the police to actually take this case seriously. And her mother, Geraldine, will be one of our speakers at our event on May 5th coming up. And really it's an honor to have her mom be willing to share her daughter's story with the larger community. And in conversation with her mother, since my grandfather was from Jemez, and I've spent a lot of reasonable amount of time in my community there, we figured out we're kind of related through marriage or through families. Our families are intermarried. So, that this is something that really hits home for me, and really has fortified my my own commitment to the work. Another case that is really also impacting, has been really impactful, is again last year in November, my other tribal community at Taos Pueblo. You have Diana Autumn Leaf Suazo, late 20s, just received her Bachelor of Fine Arts at the Institute of American Indian Arts, was getting ready to start a master's program at the same institution. Her art career was skyrocketing. She was the week that she was murdered by her domestic partner. She was getting ready to go to LA for a pretty prestigious opportunity to be at the LA Skins Film Festival, and have her work was being used in all the promotional materials. She was going to be there selling her work with her family. And unfortunately, in a heinous act of domestic violence, she's no longer with us. And we're a pretty small community up at Taos Pueblo, and yeah, it's been pretty devastating to lose somebody who, so much potential. So when I talk about Indigenous futurisms, what is it that we want to create, right? So as we were informed, and we were informed about the passing of our beloved community member, Diana Suazo, interestingly enough, we had been commissioned as a collective to create a mural for the Institute of American Indian Arts College that she had just graduated from and was going to resume attending for her master's. We had been commissioned to do a art piece, a mural in their museum's courtyard, and this is right downtown Santa Fe. So the mock-up for the art piece was an homage, an honoring of place, of original place. And the original name of Santa Fe is Ogapoge Owinge, which stands for place, white shell water place, the place of the white shell water. Because downtown, where the large Basilica Church now sits, is and was the site of a very sacred place. It was a spring, it was a sacred spring, and that's where White Shell Water Place gets its name. That was the name of the spring. And so considering that we got commissioned to do this mural right literally next to very sacred grounds that our city gets its name from indigenously, we wanted to create a visual landmark to honor the place name, kind of like land back homage here. So unfortunately, that's right around the time we found out we lost Deanna, because we were working on that mural at the end of November through mid-December. And so we actually on the mural behind where I am, second to the left on the blue, is an image of a woman kind of kneeling, and she has her hair up in a traditional style bun that we wear up at Taos Pueblo, and she has the red earring. So we integrated that in honor of her. And the side of the mural became a space of healing, became a space of community gathering, became a space of painting folks, her friends, her student colleagues, her professors. So many people came through at that time because we invited community to come hold space with us, because we were in mourning as we were creating this mural. We were sad. I know her family
It's a small community up at our pueblo. Everybody was in mourning. And so it's just not only was the creation of the mural a ceremony already, because it was honoring the land where we inhabit here, but it was also became a ceremony because we were holding space for our sister Deanna. And the mural has a whole long story. This is just one part of it, but what's important is who's in the mural. We collaborated with youth. We have our children in this mural. We're all femmes and matriarchs, two matriarchs, the one on the right with her children, and then me and my daughter's kind of holding space in the front. On the left is a sister who, Nicole Martin. She works with Indigenous Women Rising here in New Mexico, which is a pretty radically awesome Indigenous woman-led organization that advocates for abortion rights, and they help Indigenous women with the full spectrum of reproductive care. This organization will pay for you to have a midwife if you want to have a midwife or have a baby out of the hospital, and they'll also pay for abortion services if an Indigenous woman needs that. Really collaborating, our work collaborates with other like-minded Indigenous women and femme-led organizations. We integrate youth all the time as much as possible. I think for me and our org, I would say that youth mentorship is a priority moving forward. Our young people are very passionate about MMIR, the young women we work with, and they have a lot to say. So really kind of holding space to help and support them, which also ties back into the rebuilding of the matriarchy and the rebuilding of ourselves as women in a society, in a dominant culture that denies our existence on the daily. So let's talk more about rematriation, because it's happening, and it's happening all across the Americas. This is from a women's march a couple years back when Trump got elected, or 45 got elected. All these women's marches, the white feminists were in an uproar. They were in an uproar, and they were having these marches, but they weren't really centering Indigenous women here in New Mexico. So we kind of had to step up our advocacy and make sure that we were centered. And so this is like the second annual Women's March that we had here. I can't tell you exactly what year this was, maybe around 2019 as well. And we basically just inserted ourselves in these actions because we weren't being invited to the table. So we had to just pretty much take up space. And that's kind of what you have to do. The days of asking for permission, I think they're over. I think maybe around pre-COVID, I would have been a little bit more gracious in how I do. I mean, I'm always mindful and spirit-led and love-led and heart-centered, but I'm not asking for permission anymore in the work. This is some of our action, maybe same action, Women's March. This is the Indigenous Syndicate, because again, the larger feminist movement in our city was not including us. And so we have to take up space, and that's, I would encourage you all to take up as much space as you can in your institution, in your place of work. And if you can't do that, there's a problem. If you're not being afforded that opportunity, if the institution just wants to extract from you but not listen to you fully, there is a problem. And so that's where mobilizing comes in, and using our bodies as politic. I'm always big about the body, the Indigenous body, and bringing Indigenous bodies together in a safe way. I would almost argue
Now though, this is pre-COVID, that our work, I feel like, me personally, unless the call really comes to it, I'm kind of done with frontline activism. I'd rather put my efforts and energy into cultural reclamation and farming and stuff like that, which is kind of where our movement is moving towards, as you'll see in the coming slides. One thing that we were kind of a part of, I'm not going to say I was directly involved with any of the taking down of the racist monuments in our city, but this was like the main one downtown. This was basically a monument erected in the late 1800s. And this is a part of rematriation work. So this is why I'm including this, because this was really a big deal in our city, in the state capital, for a giant racist monument in the city, in the downtown plaza, to be taken down on Indigenous Peoples Day at the hands of like 100 community members, after Indigenous people had been asking and after the city had promised they were going to take this down. As you can see, there's some signage right here on the bottom left of MMIW names. There was like a 3-day occupation of the downtown plaza, which culminated on Indigenous Peoples Day in a community takedown of this racist monument, basically with an inscription on the side that was basically saying to the valiant soldiers who, and I'm just paraphrasing, it said something to the extent of, to the valiant soldiers who basically wiped out the savage Indians for the nation, for the state of New Mexico, or for the claiming of northern New Mexico. So this had to go, because there's no racist monuments in the Indigenous futurisms, folks. They gotta go. So what is another example of rematriation? Our farm. Our farm is the new. This is what I call an experiment or an effort in land back praxis. You academics should know the word praxis. It's kind of a very academic word, but I like it because it has an X, and I like all things that have X in them, because Dr. X likes X's. And land back praxis, so that this is where your academic institutional knowledge can work in tandem with your actual indigenous knowledge, I guess, traditional ecological knowledge. So you're seeing the application of all these things we learn and taking it back into something practical, which is, this is the beginning of our farm. So this was a year ago. We, through the work of allyship, it was a collaboration between some of the nonprofits we work with, county, underutilized county land here in Santa Fe, Ogapoge, and using our white allies, our nonprofit allies, because we're just grassroots organizations, to glean on the city and the county. Hey, look at these big pieces of underutilized land. Why don't you try giving it back to community so they can create a community garden? And furthermore, why don't you not charge them for it? Because there's nothing happening on this land anyway. And why don't you give us a year lease for $1 and see what we can rehab, see what we can make happen. So this was the beginning. This was like right now, same time a year ago, we got 1 acre of county land to do something with. And that was through the collaboration between white allyship, basically. And here we are on a community day with all different people planting, because the work isn't just with Indigenous people anymore, right? This movement is bigger than Indigenous people. To save the earth, to save ourselves, we really need to work together. So, this is what I say about the difference between, I've already talked about the difference between Western feminism and matriarchy. But let me just emphasize that a little bit more since I'm here, because I think we really need to think about this critically, and looking at rematriation as a praxis that, Western feminism, again, is pretty individually centered, right? But our work as matriarchs and cultural and land reclamation really revolves around
community. And land protection connects us to our original mothers, really reconnecting with the earth. This is the kind of work that the future is going to be asking for us. It's going to be asking us to work in allyship with non-Native folks, because as you know, a lot of Native people aren't on board with the Indigenous futurisms yet. I mean, a lot of folks, we're still working through our own traumas. But in the Indigenous futurisms that I'm trying to create here in Santa Fe, and the new world that we're creating, that I always talk about BC and AC. It's not before Christ and after Christ anymore. It's before COVID and after COVID, and the game has shifted, let me tell you. And so it behooves us to learn to live and reestablish our connection to the land, because this is where the futurisms is going, is really reclaiming our food sources, reclaiming these connections, because we may not always have the grocery store to get our food, 10, 20 years down the line. I mean, already if you look at production and how, you go to the grocery store these days and you're not getting the things that you're used to, or the prices have gone, tripled. So always looking at moving the movement forward, and always looking at the antidote to MMIR. What is the counter venom? What is the counter narrative? What is the future that we are trying to create, right? So rematriation is the future for not only Indigenous people, but I think for everybody, because Indigenous people and Indigenous women in particular hold such subjective knowledges. We hold knowledge about herbs and plants. We hold knowledge about how to caretake the earth, how to caretake our communities, all these things. And the futurisms that I see center Indigenous women and children, empowers women and our gender non-conforming siblings, sees feminine wisdom not as a source of weakness, but as a source of strength. The Indigenous futurisms that I'm about recognize and uplifts Indigenous excellence, because the dominant culture will never, they can't even conceive of our excellence and our multiplicity, much less value it. They don't even recognize it. So we have to begin to value these things within ourselves and create our own systems with our own benchmarks and evaluation methods. Also, again, like I said before, we're no longer asking permission to advocate and do what is necessary to protect ourselves, our children, our communities, and future generations. So based on the first picture you saw, this is what we created in months. This was a full swing of the summer, where we have, we're planting heirloom local varieties of bean, squash, and corn. We have amaranth. If you look in the center of the image, it looks like kind of like a dark red plant growing. We planted amaranth, which is a traditional superfood, kind of similar to chia seeds down south in South America. These foods, this amaranth plant was banned from being grown here in New Mexico during Spanish Inquisition and the Spanish colonial era. They saw the power in the food and the power that we got from eating these foods like amaranth, and they banned the people from growing that. So imagine all the ways, which our daily life ways of just growing nutritious food for ourselves was impacted during these times. So to do the work of putting your hands in the ground again and planting a seed, every seed you plant is like a tiny ancestor. I mean, talk about a revolution. This is the revolution. This is the Indigenous futurism. This is the land back praxis in effect. So I show you these as examples of all the ways we address the culture of violence, all the ways that we address the toxic ideologies of extractive colonialism by simply planting a seed and a prayer and an intention. I mean, that's the movement that I'm working towards. I'm going to stop now because, again, I'm getting emotional again. So maybe we should take a little break and hear another part of the CD. How does that sound? Okay, so I'm gonna bring us to another song from the CD. Again, all of these songs are free to listen to on our website. Did I play Stronger? Did I start with that one? I did, huh? That was a good one to start with. So let's see which one I would like to play next. Okay, let's listen to something different. So part of also what our CD has is a couple of different tracks where it's just conversations between women. And I think they're really powerful. So I'm going to play you a segment of two Indigenous community women here talking. We have Autumn Rose Billy, she's Taos Pueblo and Dene, and Lynette Houses, she's Chiricahua Apache, and I think she's Taos Pueblo too. I mean, I don't think so. She is Taos Pueblo too. So have a listen.
Within the movement, we have a lot of, and within Indigenous communities, we have a lot of patriarchal behaviors. Our governments, down to our tribal leaders, our families, our relatives, our brothers, and these cycles of toxic behaviors, toxic masculinity, we know that they come from colonialism and their patriarchy and their views. And we know that this isn't traditional teachings and traditional ways of life, but somehow that's gotten lost, that traditional ways that we treat the women and the land the same, they're both sacred.
I think this is a phrase that I've learned when learning about reproductive justice and understanding how we're connected to the land, but when we hurt the land, we hurt our bodies, and vice versa. We have a very direct, intimate relationship with the land that we're on. I think we have to think about also the well-being and how we take care of our women in our home, or maybe they may not have a good home and they feel like they need to leave, and that can happen with that disappearing and that effect of going missing. It can be pretty intense and sad that they feel like they have to leave in order to step away from something that might be toxic. And so that's also very sad to realize too. And how can we take care of our women, or how can we love them to not feel like they have to leave? And
I think that is becoming a problem too, is a lot of unfortunately leaders within the Indigenous movement, a lot of them will advocate for Mother Earth, yet are still perpetuating these patriarchal behaviors and toxic masculinity, abusing our women, taking advantage of them. And, these things go hand in hand. You can't be talking about Mother Earth, while abusing or mistreating your own relatives, your own sisters. So, it's something that needs to be talked about. And it goes back to our brothers, checking our brothers and standing up, Us women are strong, but also our men are strong too. We shouldn't have to carry this emotional baggage. We have enough, and we shouldn't have to be strong all the time. Our brothers should carry this weight with us and help us heal, help our circles heal, and, hold those circles and keep them clean, and defend the line in those ways.
Alrighty. So let's go back to screen sharing, and we're gonna come to the final part of our presentation here. I hope you're still with us, and I hope you're doing self-care as we move through. I know it's tough, but that's why we're here. We're no accident. Our ancestors were the prayers of our ancestors. And so again, as we think about the Indigenous futurisms, I get emotional because the work that I've been blessed to do post doctoral work has been so healing. Getting a PhD was a huge sacrifice. It cost me things, and I've spent time wondering if it's worth it. If it's worth it to have done to have done that and just given so much of my life to academia. But as a political and personal choice now, I'm choosing to disengage with the institutions and create new institutions. And I do credit my Western education for fortifying me with the Western intellectual knowledge and capacity, as well as my Indigenous DNA and resiliency and ancestral guidance and family to give me both knowledges. And so I'm a multi-diverse Indigenous scholar, which leads to my name, Dr. X, because, it's complicated. But, I realized so much of my time and life was given to the institution that I almost, I kind of wrangled with it for a couple of years about how does it all come together to work into something really beautiful. And I'm finally thinking I'm reaching the rainbow, the silver lining of why and how I can bring all this together to create the new. And so look at what we were able to create on this land. We built a traditional Dene shade structure where we have meetings and gatherings. This was after a beautiful rain. You have all our plants growing, our corn, our heirloom seeds that were put into the ground by Indigenous people on our community celebration that we had to jump off the beginning of the farm. So this was already, well into the summer. Everything's growing, everything's happy, the land is happy, we're healing and growing. So many beautiful conversations, so many beautiful engagements for community, because Santa Fe is not always a safe place. It's kind of anti-Indigenous here. And so we needed to create a safe space for our people to commune and heal. This is an Indigenous harvest feast we had in our pueblos. This kind of aligned with our traditional calendar, where we have our traditional feast days, where we're celebrating our crops. They were butchering a sheep. Our Dene siblings were butchering. We are growing Indigenous seeds. And to me, this is the antidote to MMIR. This is the antidote to the culture of violence. Look at the rainbows that pop up in the pictures. I mean, if that's not a sign of the, I don't know what else is. That's my validation. My rainbows, those are my validations from the other side. Having young people, having community have a place to make and learn about Indigenous foods. They're taking corn that they picked that day, my daughter and others, and they're putting it in the grinder to make like masa, basically, that they're making these kind of Dene style tamales. I know there's a different name for them, but for lack of a better term, let's just call it a tamale because that's pretty pan-Indigenous. They cook those under the flame. And so this is the work. This is the community building work that we need to do in our communities. I don't want to focus on the problems. I want to focus on the solutions. And so again, moving forward to our MMIWG Awareness Day we have coming up. We have a day of action. It's not a protest. We're doing community actions and gatherings here in Santa Fe in our downtown plaza. We pulled a permit with the city to host this event. We have this evening, we have a sign making workshop. This is pre-recorded. Sorry, I don't know if I blew it, but today is actually April 22nd. And we are having our sign making event this evening where we're making signs, banners, posters for the event. And tomorrow we have a ribbon skirt class with the lovely Erin Begay. This class is full. I think we capped out at 20. Our collaborators at My Native Sisters Fire have donated all the fabric to make skirts, and all these skirts will be worn on our action on May 5th. And then what else? Moving forward to to, as we getting ready to close our presentation, I just want to share with you the video that we put out for our event on May 5th. And just show you these last couple images because mentorship and equipping the young women in the next generation to hold these leadership spaces and to not think twice about it and to not second guess themselves is kind of where my work is now. It's taken me my whole life to build the resolve and resiliency to do this work and to be in a good, sound, spiritual, mental, physical space to do this work. I couldn't have done this work as a young person. I probably couldn't even have done it 10 years ago. But I want to raise up and help mentor young women so that they have the strength and their leaps and bounds. I mean, my daughter's already leaps and bounds ahead of me. And that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm really it's a wonder and a miracle just to see my daughter hold space. It's really an amazing thing. And so I would like to share the video that we created for our event. This just got pushed out on social media. If you're not following Three Sisters Collective on Instagram, please follow us. And I'm gonna go ahead and kind of wrap it up with this video and connect back with you visually. Breathe, take time to breathe, y'all.
I dance for our missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, for the ones who never made it home, and for the ones who are still missing.
Destiny, Alexis, Atencio, Jemez, Elzada, Nika, Yellow Horse, Ashlyn, Mike, Shauna, Oya, Kapita, Redman, Jaden, Yas.
May 5th is a day of awareness to bring attention to missing and murdered Indigenous relatives.
We're here because of them.
Sisterhood is sacred.
So I just want to say thank you, Ta'a, Tekinopa, in my 2 tribal languages. I also want you to see this image here because I always do my Zooms and presentations in front of this image to me, which really encapsulates the Indigenous futurisms. That's could be myself or my daughter in this image. I mean, we're kind of we look the same. She looks like her daughter, but I mean, like her dad, but she also looks like me. And so yeah, just really wanting to highlight all the beauty and complexity in the movement. But there's so many ways to address it, and really working from your heart space and working from that heart space is the kind of movement that I'm working towards and that Three Sisters is working towards. And as we build ourselves and as we build our sisterhood, we build our communities. So I encourage you to think about all the ways that you can get involved. And I hope that this has given you some ideas of ways you can address MMIR from varying perspectives. Because as I said, there's such a spectrum of ways that we can get involved in the movement. You can go the legal route, learn law and policy, all those things. You can be an artist. You can make music that elevates and uplifts. And really, I encourage you to be embodied, to find a spiritual practice, to live it every day, to make it a part of your daily practice, just like you go to your classes. all of that, you know, all you need all the fortification you have, not just intellectually, but we're multidimensional, spiritual, indigenous beings, and we need to honor all of that within ourselves. And so thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. Never apologize for your tears either. If we ain't crying, we ain't doing something right in this work. Because the tears are beautifully crafted. They're genetically releasing cortisol. So don't stop your tears from flowing either, because they're actually healing. So with that said, ta'a, Devanopa, thank you. Thank you for allowing me this space to share with you my work and my heart work and the heart work of Three Sisters here in Ogapoge. Thank you.
Please follow and keep up to date with the Three Sisters Collective at threesisterscollective.org and on social media at Three Sisters Collective. We would like to thank Dr. X for her presentation and for sharing her wisdom and knowledge with us, and for being vulnerable with us as well. This is a heavy issue that should not be only on the shoulders of Indigenous women. We thank you for letting us honor and uplift you and the Three Sisters Collective in this way.
If you would like to stay connected with our center, please follow us on our social media accounts and subscribe to our newsletter. On Instagram, we are at AIRC UCSC, Facebook at AIRC.UCSC, and you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter by going to our official website at AIRC.UCSC.edu.
We want to take a moment to recognize the AIRC team for their work on tonight's event, and a special thanks to our MMIWG committee.
Thank you again for being with us today. Our team would like to leave you with these words from Leanne Simpson, Anishinaabe writer, musician, and academic from Canada. Gender violence is central to our ongoing disposition, occupation, and erasure, and Indigenous families and communities have always resisted this. We've always fought back and organized against this. Our grandparents resisted gender violence. Our youth are organizing and resisting gender violence because we have no other option. Thank you. Neisha.
We are